This is not just a story. This is revenge.
The corner office on the 40th floor always smells like expensive mahogany and unearned confidence. My boss, Julian Vance, sat behind his minimalist glass desk. He wasn't looking at me. He was adjusting his cufflinks. Gold, 24 karat, bought with company money. Beside him stood his wife, Victoria Sterling. Her face was a mask of cold, generational wealth. "Sign it," Victoria said. Her voice lacked rhythm, dead, mechanical. I looked down. Non-disclosure agreement. Immediate termination for gross moral misconduct. No severance. No stock options. Julian finally looked up, his eyes wide, with a perfectly rehearsed expression of disgust and betrayal. "I trusted you, Maya," he whispered, shaking his head. "But extortion? Pretending we had something outside of work just to blackmail my family for a board seat? It's sick." He was offering me up as a sacrificial lamb to save his marriage and, more importantly, his access to her family's multi-billion-dollar trust. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect corporate execution. He thought I was leaving this building ruined, blacklisted, and silent. But here is where he messed up. He assumed he was the only predator in the room. He didn't realize that the paperwork on that desk wasn't my exit strategy. It was his countdown. And hidden underneath the very floorboards of that office was a liability he hadn't even begun to calculate. A detail that would change everything within the next 7 minutes. To understand why a person spends 9 months building a legal guillotine, you have to understand the cost of the lie. For 2 years, Julian Vance didn't just run Vanguard Holdings. He ran my life. Late nights in high-end hotels across Manhattan. Weekend conferences in Aspen. He used every classic manipulation tactic in the corporate playbook. Isolation. Intermittent reinforcement. The constant, dangling carrot of a senior partner promotion. "Victoria and I are just a business arrangement," he would tell me, his voice smooth, dripping into my ear in the quiet hours of the night. "The moment the logistics merger is finalized, I'm filing for divorce. We build our own empire, Maya. Just hold on a little longer." I poured my life into his firm. I restructured their entire tech portfolio. I stayed awake until 3 a.m. fixing his fraudulent accounting entries, protecting him from the internal auditors. I carried his secrets like gold. Then came the mistake. Victoria found a piece of jewelry in his briefcase, a classic, careless slip by a man who thought he was too smart to get caught. Faced with losing the Sterling family capital, the actual engine behind Vanguard Holdings, Julian didn't hesitate. He shifted the narrative. He told his wife I was an obsessed, unstable subordinate. A stalker. Someone who used corporate data access to fabricate an affair and demand a multi-million-dollar payout. Sitting in that chair, looking at the security guard waiting by the door, the psychological weight was suffocating. They weren't just firing me. They were erasing my professional existence. They wanted me to leave with my head down, branded a criminal, while he stayed in his penthouse. They wanted absolute destruction. But absolute destruction leaves absolute clarity. When you strip a brilliant person of everything they value, you don't leave them helpless. You leave them completely free of distraction. But they didn't know about the second ledger. Every narcissist has a blind spot. It is always their own reflection. Julian's specific flaw was his absolute conviction that money could buy blind loyalty, and that old men are irrelevant. Vanguard Holdings wasn't built by Julian. It was funded entirely by Arthur Sterling, Victoria's father. Arthur was a legendary, iron-willed titan of the shipping industry who had officially retired 5 years prior due to failing health. Julian viewed the old man as a ghost. A walking bank account whose only job was to stay quiet in his Connecticut mansion and let Julian play CEO. Julian assumed that because he had successfully manipulated the daughter, he had conquered the father. He treated the company like his personal playground, burning through capital, hiding losses under complex shell structures, and treating the staff like disposable assets. He thought I was just another asset. He forgot that I was the one who designed the entire digital infrastructure for Vanguard's private equity transactions. He forgot that I knew exactly how much money was flowing out of the Sterling Trust and into Julian's private offshore accounts in Panama. More importantly, he forgot that old titans don't become irrelevant just because they step out of the spotlight. They just become watchful, and Julian's arrogance made him completely blind to who was watching him back. He thought he won. He was wrong, because he never asked one simple question: who was actually managing Arthur Sterling's private digital estate? Revenge at this level requires extreme patience. No shouting, no emotional outbursts, just paperwork and silence. 9 months ago, I noticed a discrepancy in the corporate voting blocks. Julian was quietly trying to dilute the Sterling family's majority stake by issuing phantom shares to an anonymous entity called Vance Global LLC. He was planning to steal the company right out from under his wife's family. I didn't report it to HR. HR exists to protect the firm, not the truth. Instead, I took a train to Connecticut. I didn't knock on the front door of the Sterling estate. I sent an encrypted file directly to Arthur Sterling's private, unlisted server, a server I had personally secured the previous winter. The file contained every offshore transaction Julian had made, every fake invoice, every text message where Julian called Victoria a clueless ATM. Arthur Sterling didn't get angry. Men who build empires don't waste energy on rage. He invited me in. We sat in his study for 4 hours. We didn't talk about the affair. We talked about mathematics. We talked about corporate governance. Arthur looked at me with cold, clear eyes and said, "My daughter married a thief because she wanted a trophy. But I will not let a thief burn down what took me 40 years to build." Over the next 30 weeks, under Arthur's direct supervision and using his top-tier, off-the-grid legal counsel, we executed a silent corporate bypass. A secret clause within the original Sterling Trust allowed the primary trustee, Arthur, to reallocate non-voting equity blocks into active, super voting shares in the event of documented fiduciary fraud by the sitting CEO. Julian was so busy hiding his affair and checking his reflection that he never noticed the SEC filings being quietly altered in the background. But the architecture was missing one final piece, a trigger. And Julian was about to pull it himself. Back in the office, the silence was heavy. Julian leaned forward, tapping the gold pen on the desk. "We don't have all day, Maya. Sign the ENDA, take your personal belongings in the box outside, and walk away. If you don't, Victoria is calling the district attorney. We have a cyber harassment file ready to ship. You'll be in a federal holding cell by midnight." Victoria crossed her arms. Her eyes were tiny, black beads of pure contempt. "You thought you could climb into my world?" She sneered. "You're an employee, a line item, you're nothing." Jen Jewel. Close-up of Maya's face. Perfectly calm, a slow, slight smile forms. This was their moment of absolute certainty. They felt the intoxicating rush of total power. They believed they had completely cornered a defenseless woman. "Julian," I said softly. My voice was barely a whisper. "Are you sure this is the path you want to take?" He laughed. A short, ugly sound. "It's not a path, Maya. It's over. You lost. Sign the paper." I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. I didn't sign. I dropped the pen. It rolled across the glass desk, leaving a thin trail of black ink. "I'm not signing," I said. And right on cue, Julian's personal encrypted phone began to vibrate violently against the glass. Julian frowned, reaching for his phone. He looked at the screen. The caller ID simply read, "CFO Internal." He pressed speakerphone, his voice dropping into his authoritative executive register. "Leon, I told you I'm in a confidential termination meeting. This can wait. It can't." "Julian," the CFO's voice came through the speaker. It was shaking. The smooth confidence of a multi-million-dollar executive completely evaporated. The main operating accounts, the Sterling Trust liquidity lines, they've just been pulled. Julian stood up so fast his leather chair rolled back and hit the mahogany wall. "What do you mean pulled?" That's an unauthorized freeze. Call the bank back immediately. It's not a freeze, Julian. Leon stammered. The funds haven't been locked by the bank. They've been legally moved. Someone executed an emergency proxy takeover of the holding company's parent entity at 1:45 p.m. Every single dollar of operating capital is sitting in a new treasury account under a completely different corporate tax ID. Victoria's face drained of color. She looked at her husband. Julian? What is he talking about? That's my father's money. Calm down, Julian hissed, sweat suddenly glistening on his forehead. He turned back to the phone. Leon, who signed the authorization? Arthur is in a medical facility. He can't sign a wire transfer of that magnitude without my co-signature. He didn't sign it, Julian, Leon whispered. The new majority shareholder signed it. Julian slowly lowered the phone. The room felt incredibly cold. He looked at me, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to piece together a puzzle whose edges he couldn't see. What did you do? He whispered. I reached into my blazer pocket. I didn't pull out a phone or a recording device. I pulled out a single embossed piece of heavy parchment paper, the official corporate seal of Vanguard Global Holdings. A document unfolding in slow motion, revealing the bold heading, Notice of Extraordinary Board Action. You always told me I was great with numbers, Julian, I said, my voice steady, conversational, completely devoid of anger. But you never actually checked my math. I placed the document over the unsigned ENDA. 3 weeks ago, under Section 12B of the Sterling Family Trust Charter, Arthur Sterling legally dissolved the non-voting status of his 52% equity block due to systemic corporate asset diversion. He didn't take the shares back himself. He didn't give them to Victoria either, considering she signed a post-nuptial agreement giving you joint management rights over her personal assets. Julian stared at the document. His breathing was shallow, heavy. Arthur transferred that controlling 52% block into a private blind trust, I continued, leaning forward, looking directly into his panicked eyes. A trust managed entirely by an independent trustee. Me. I don't work for you, Julian. As of 20 minutes ago, you work for me. Before Julian could speak, the heavy door swung wide. 3 men in dark suits stepped into the room. 2 of them were senior forensic investigators from the state's Financial Crimes Division. The third was the head of corporate security, a man Julian had hired himself. Mr. Vance, the security chief said, his voice flat, completely stripped of his usual deference. You need to step away from the desk. Are you insane? Victoria screamed, her voice cracking, her wealthy composure completely shattered. This is our company. Get this garbage out of our office. Actually, Mrs. Vance, the lead investigator said, pulling a laminated document from his breast pocket. This is an emergency asset preservation order. We have a warrant to seize all digital devices, servers, and financial records belonging to Julian Vance and Vance Global LLC under suspicion of grand larceny and corporate embezzlement. Julian stood frozen. The gold pen he had been playing with lay between us like a discarded bullet. He looked at his wife, then at the security team, and finally at me. The realization hit him all at once, the absolute finality of it. He hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his standing, his reputation, his freedom, and the wealth he had spent a lifetime parasitically clinging to. I pulled out a second document from my folder. The CEO appointment letter, signed by the board of directors via proxy vote at 1:45 p.m. Julian Vance, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. You are officially suspended from all duties at Vanguard Holdings, effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. Your access badges have been deactivated. Your corporate credit lines are closed. I turned to the security chief. Escort them out of the building. Both of them. If they attempt to touch a single file or asset on their way out, file immediate trespassing and destruction of evidence charges. Watching a man collapse psychologically is a quiet affair. There was no screaming match, no dramatic film music. Just the squeak of Julian's expensive leather shoes on the marble floor as security guided him toward the private elevator bank. Victoria followed him, shouting frantic, useless legal threats into her phone, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her designer handbag twice. They stood on the pavement of Madison Avenue, without a corporate car, without an executive escort, surrounded by the cold, indifferent noise of the city. Within 48 hours, the internal memo would leak to the Wall Street Journal. The sterling name would survive, but Julian Vance would become a radioactive anomaly in the financial world. A thief who got outsmarted by his own assistant. I walked over to the glass desk. I sat down in the executive chair. The leather was still warm from his presence, but the space felt completely different now. Clean. Empty. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from Arthur Sterling. It was short, just 2 words. Checkmate, Maya. I didn't reply. I locked the phone, placed it in my bag, and looked out over the skyline. The empire hadn't fallen. It had simply changed hands. Most people believe that power belongs to the person who speaks the loudest. The person who owns the corner office, wears the gold cufflinks, and dictates the terms of the room. But true power doesn't make noise. True power is calculated. It sits in the background, watches the arrogance of the predator, and builds a structure so flawless that the trap becomes invisible until the exact second it snaps shut. Julian Vance thought he could use human emotion as a disposable resource. He thought a quiet person was a weak person. He learned the hardest way possible that the quietest people are often the ones who know exactly how to dismantle your entire life with a single sheet of paper. There is a very specific boundary you never cross with a quiet person. Because once the architecture is set, you won't even realize you're walking into the trap until you hear the snap. Tell me in the comments, at what exact moment did Julian deserve what was coming? See you in the next breakdown.